Well, here we are. It's a week left to vote in the November special election here in California, and millions of California voters have already cast their ballots.
Curtis Ming is here now to break down the latest numbers, showing us who's already voted.
Yeah, we're here with Paul Mitchell of Political Data Inc. A reminder, he is the guy that the Democrats hired to draw these congressional districts that everybody is voting on. So let's take a look at the counties that have voted so far, the precincts, I should say. These aren't the districts you drew, but these are various precincts. So we have various shades of red, blue, white. What does that mean?
What this is really showing, and this is true for anybody who's really studied the state, in the Bay Area along the coast, you see a lot of heavy Democratic turnout. Same thing down in Los Angeles. But in the central part of the state, that's where you see a lot more heavy Republican turnout. And right here where we're in Sacramento, it's kind of a mix with more urban areas having higher Democratic turnout, but more Republican areas, more conservative turnout. The thing that we'll probably see is some of these more conservative areas, say Placer County, a lot of those voters are saying they're going to vote on Election Day. A lot of those Republicans, maybe they don't really trust the vote by mail system, so they'll vote later. But then at the same time, if you go down to UC Davis or Sac State on Election Day, you're going to see lines out the door with a lot of young people voting on Election Day too. So an interesting mix of people when they vote will be really critical.
And a reminder, this isn't showing how people voted, it's just showing the party that is voting.
Exactly, but one of the things about this ballot measure is it isn't so much about lines, but it's about partisan affiliation. The partisanship here in the polling is one of the most, one of the strongest factors. So in a lot of ways, geography doesn't vote, so the large number of red areas doesn't mean a lot more Republican voters. About a quarter of the electorate so far that's come in is Republican, but the party line vote is going to be really critical in this ballot measure.
Okay, so let's look overall right now. We want to pull up how many have voted so far. This is about a 21% turnout 1 week out from the election.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
Well, first off, we think turnout's going to be about 50%. So of that left-hand side, we've filled up about a 40% of that. So about 40% of the expected vote is in. But when we look at the who has voted so far, we're going to see that it's not just all groups voting equally. It really does have some key distinctions among age, ethnicity, partisanship.
All right, so let's break it down by party. I think we have a graphic that shows that. And if we look at this point, 24% of the ballots back are Democrats. 22% of the Republicans who have ballots have returned them. And independents, it's 14%.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
Well, first off, when we were here last time, both Democrats and Republicans were equally at 18%, and Democrats were about 50% of the ballots that have been returned. Democrats have been moving up a little bit lately as we see more young people and more Latinos turning in their ballots. We expect that Republican share of the electorate to go up, like I said, closer to election day. And what's really striking is the independents. On this graphic, you can see the independents are the smallest group. In terms of registration, there's more independents than there are these Republicans.
So they're sitting out at this point.
They're sitting out, and I think it's possible that they probably sit out pretty much this entire cycle. A lot of independents are seeing this real partisan air war on TV and a lot of the media, and seeing that the election doesn't really speak to them.
All right, and let's talk about age groups and demographics. It was expected that early on we would have many more people who are 65 and up getting their ballots returned right away.
Yeah.
But very few young people had returned their ballots as of last week. A week later, what do you make of this picture right here?
Well, on the far left, you can see those young people are at 9% turnout and seniors are at 39%. When we look at seniors, this is what we would expect, a high turnout, especially early. But it's actually, the gap is closing a little bit. You're starting to see seniors in the ballots as we go day by day being a smaller and smaller share of the electorate. And you're starting to see these young people, like those 50 and under, being an increasingly larger share. We would hope that this would close up entirely, that you'd see an electorate that really reflected the state's population in terms of age. But I think at the end of the day, these early ballots that are banked are really going to mean that the final vote will be driven a lot more by older voters.
All right, now we're going to talk about the racial makeups of the people who have returned their ballots. So 25% of white and other ballots have come back. Only 12% of Latino, and then 19% for both Asian and African American. What does this tell us?
Well, there's a couple things. One is I want to point this 12% Latino. Latinos are at 12% turnout. But older Latinos, they might be at 25, 28% turnout. Younger Latinos, 18 to 34-year-old Latinos are at 7% turnout right now. So a lot of the reason why Latino turnout is a lot lower is that Latinos are predominantly younger on the voter file. There are 2.5 million young Latinos on the voter file, and they are right now low turnout. We would expect some of those to vote on Election Day. Asian and African American voters are turning out under under kind of that top line white voter population, but still we're seeing those numbers pretty good going through Election Day.
Okay. All right. Well, we appreciate your insight in breaking down all these numbers. If you're still trying to figure out how to vote on Prop 50, you could scan the QR code on your screen to find our full explanation of that measure.